Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is literally one of the most monumental masterpieces ever put to paper, Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. We're going to unpack how this incredibly dense, deeply personal story is woven perfectly into the grand, totally chaotic fabric of history. I mean, yes, it's a tale of clashing empires, but at its absolute core, it's really about incredibly flawed, rich, and relatable characters who are just trying to navigate their everyday lives right through the middle of total upheaval.
Okay, so let's jump right in. To really understand this beast of a book, we've got to look at the guy who actually wrote it. Picture this. It's 1863. A 35-year-old Leo Tolstoy is going through a massive existential crisis. He's agonizing over one impossibly huge question. What is the purpose of man? He basically felt like life, the universe, the whole shebang was just entirely meaningless. So, searching for answers, he completely isolates himself out in the countryside. He's actually out there working the fields alongside peasants, observing the absolute poorest of the poor. And when he finally returns to Moscow a few months later, his mind is just racing. He starts writing what he honestly thought was just going to be a neat little short story about power play politics.
While, spoiler alert, things escalated. What started out as a little short story ended up stretching into 5 grueling, obsessive years of intense research and writing. And the final result? An awe-inspiring 1,200-page epic that packs in almost 1,000 intricately designed characters. It's wild. It completely shattered the boundaries of what people thought literature could even be.
See, Tolstoy didn't just write a really long book. He practically invented a brand new standard for realist fiction. He went so insanely deep into crafting his characters that none of them actually feel made up. And he wasn't just relying on his imagination either. He literally mapped out real-world battlefields, walked the actual dirt, and tracked down living eyewitnesses of the wars. He wanted to capture the heat of love, the bitter sting of revenge, and the pathetic tears of kings with just uncompromising, gritty reality.
So, let's set the scene. Part 1. The geopolitical stage. To truly grasp the sky-high stakes of this story, we have to look at Russia. Specifically, a terrified, deeply traditional Russia that is bracing for an inevitable, catastrophic conflict with a rapidly modernizing Europe.
The momentum here builds so incredibly fast. In 1789, the French Revolution violently overthrows the monarchy and secularizes the state. And fast forward a bit to 1799, and Napoleon Bonaparte seizes power. Now, for the traditional monarchies of Europe, and especially for the Russian Empire, this wasn't just some standard political shift, it was a mortal threat. To them, this secular revolution sparked what the Russians viewed as an inevitable, almost holy war.
And this quote right here brilliantly captures exactly what the mindset of the time was like. Anna Pavlovna, who was this elite confidant in the Russian court, openly declared, "Bonaparte is an antichrist. He is against Christianity." You see, the Russian elite didn't just view Napoleon as a rival politician or general. They saw him as a literal apocalyptic villain, threatening their faith and their entire way of life. They genuinely believed their own emperor, Alexander I, was a holy savior destined to crush the dragon of the French Revolution. All right, part 2, the illusions of peace. Because while those drums of war were beating in the background, what were the Russian elite actually doing? Let's zoom in from that grand geopolitical level down to the deeply flawed, highly intimate, and honestly, incredibly wasteful lives of these families during peacetime.
So who exactly are we dealing with beneath all those layers of wealth? Well, first off, you've got Prince Andrea. He's trapped under the thumb of his strict ex-soldier father and is absolutely desperate for battlefield glory. Then there's Count Pierre. He's an illegitimate son who is suddenly thrust into immense wealth, just wandering aimlessly looking for some kind of meaning in life. And finally, we have the Rostov siblings, Natasha and Nikolai. They belong to this family with gorgeous outward neoclassical glory, but behind closed doors, their wasteful father is gambling away their entire inheritance, basically plunging them into secret poverty.
The contrast here is just staggering. I mean, during this so-called peace, these elites are completely wrapped up in trivial, sometimes flat-out absurd squabbles. Take Count Pierre. The guy doesn't even know how to properly hold a pistol, yet he ends up in a clumsy, life-threatening duel over his cheating wife. Meanwhile, Nikolai Rostov falls right into a trap and loses a mind-boggling 4,300 rubles in a single gambling match, completely devastating his family's already crumbling estate. They are totally absorbed in their high society illusions and completely unprepared for the brutal reality marching right toward their doorstep.
In that brutal reality, it officially arrives in 1805 at the Battle of Austerlitz. The Russian army goes in feeling pretty confident, but Napoleon attacks right through the fog, sending the Russians into absolute sheer panic. Just imagine the visceral horror of this moment. The Russian general, Kutuzov, is literally bleeding from his face. Prince Andrei runs up asking if the wound is deep, and the general just points at his own fleeing, terrified soldiers and says, "The wound's not here, it is there. Stop them."
This specific moment completely shatters Prince Andrei. Desperate for that glory we talked about, he picks up a fallen Russian flag, screams hurrah, and charges headfirst at the enemy. It's like the ultimate romanticized movie vision of war, right? But reality is cruel. He is almost immediately struck in the head and falls unconscious while his men are just slaughtered. And when he finally wakes up, who is standing over him? Napoleon Bonaparte, the very man Andrei used to idolize. But Napoleon just looks down at him with pity. In an instant, Andrei's romantic view of war and his whole idolization of great men just completely evaporates.
Now, Tolstoy masterfully contrasts Andrei's heroic, if futile, charge with a deeply relatable, incredibly human moment from Nikolai Rostov. While the army is being routed, Nikolai actually spots the charismatic Russian emperor fleeing, struggling to force his horse over a tiny ditch. Nikolai wants to be a hero, right? He wants to rush in and save his emperor, but he completely freezes. His mind just spins into this panic of self-doubt. He's thinking, what if the emperor judges me? What if I do it wrong? He is literally paralyzed by his own insecurities while history just gallops right past him.
Which brings us to Part 3, the catastrophe of 1812. Following a very fragile, tense peace, the ultimate nightmare finally comes to Russian soil. Napoleon's massive 1812 invasion of Russia.
General Kutuzov is tasked with the impossible, stopping the French Goliath. On September 7, 1812, these two massive armies clash at Borodino. The human cost here is just unimaginable. But Tolstoy observes something really beautiful amidst all that carnage. Prince Andrei, who is mortally wounded in the chaos, finds himself in a makeshift field hospital right next to Prince Anatole. Now, Anatole is a man who had previously tried to completely ruin Andrei's life by tricking his fiancée, Natasha. Yet, as both men lay there dying, all that hatred just vanishes. In the face of death, these bitter enemies suddenly feel this profound compassion and love for one another.
Following that bloodbath, General Kutuzov makes a brilliant but incredibly painful tactical decision. He completely abandons Moscow. And this actually leads to the rapid demise of the French army. Napoleon marches his troops into this eerily empty city. With absolutely no Russian authorities left to maintain order, the undisciplined French troops accidentally burn Moscow down to ashes. Then, the brutal Russian winter sets in, and Napoleon realizes his grand army is starving. They're forced into this deadly, freezing retreat, harassed by Russian troops the entire way back, until the once invincible army just completely collapses.
Now, throughout all this burning chaos, remember Count Pierre? The guy we talked about earlier who was desperately searching for purpose? Well, while everyone else flees, Pierre actually wanders the burning streets of Moscow. He gets captured by the French and faces the horrifying, gritty reality of being a prisoner of war. Yet, incredibly, it's here, stripped of his vast wealth and all those high society illusions, that he finally finds his anchor. Through intense suffering, leaning on the teachings of a secret Freemason society he had joined earlier, and just sheer endurance, Pierre discovers that true purpose isn't found in luxury. It's found in the quiet, unyielding resilience of the human spirit.
And that leads us to Part 4, Tolstoy's timeless message. As the literal fires of 1812 burn out, we can finally pull all the threads of this vast tapestry together. Let's look at Tolstoy's ultimate philosophical takeaways about war, peace, and humanity itself.
The final resolutions for these characters are, honestly, deeply bitter, yet incredibly real. Rebuilding comes with some very heavy compromises. The formerly wealthy Rostovs completely lose their estates to debt. Nikolai's cousin, Sonia, actually sacrifices her own true love just to repay the family's favors, which allows Nikolai to marry the wealthy Maria just to save them all from ruin. But, out of the ashes, Pierre and a much humbler Natasha Rostov finally find love together. Ultimately, every single one of them is entirely reshaped by the tragedy, the compromises, and the sheer, unstoppable momentum of the war.
This perfectly, brilliantly illustrates Tolstoy's overarching thesis. He wrote, "Even an emperor is a prisoner of circumstances." See, Tolstoy passionately argues against the idea that grand historical events are directed by solitary great men like Napoleon or Alexander. Instead, he says history is this massive, uncontrollable wave created by a million tiny, overlapping circumstances. The weather, a random musket shot, a soldier's sudden panic at a ditch. Even an all-powerful emperor is really just a captive rider on the wave of history.
Which leaves us with one final profound question.
turning Tolstoy's historical mirror right back onto ourselves. How much are we bound by our own circumstances? Think about it. In our daily battles, our little squabbles, and our grand life plans, how free are we really? And how much are we simply navigating the chaotic, unpredictable tapestry of the world around us? It's a really fascinating thought to take with you today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next explainer.